Now. All right, and good morning. Happy Friday to everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this next episode of the Virginia Union University Faculty Spotlight. I'm Terrell Strayhorn, the Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs here at Virginia Union University, and so delighted that you could join us and be part of this session. We are delighted today to have what is going to be our third episode in the series spotlighting our faculty and their research and all of their contributions here at the university. And we have with us today Dr. Portia Cole, who is the Associate Professor at Virginia Union University in the Department of Social Work and Sociology. She's received her undergraduate degree in sociology from George Washington University, Master of Social Work degree from the Catholic University of America, and a doctorate in sociology from American University. In 2004, Dr. Cole was awarded a W.K. Kellogg Health Disparities Postdoctoral Fellowship and completed a placement at Morgan State University's public health program, where she helped to formulate cancer prevention strategies and a number of other important efforts. In 2007, Dr. Cole received H. Jack Geiger Congressional Health Policy Fellowship. We're going to talk about that today, and served as a legislative assistant in the late Senator Edward Kennedy's Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, that's the HELP Committee office. In this role, she participated in national public policy decisions and discourse all around improving the health status and disparities of racial, ethnic minority populations. Believe it or not, she is principal author of several peer-reviewed publications that focus on the experiences of persons living and working with disabilities. Her most recent book chapter analyzed the impact of Americans with Disabilities Act on the impact of that on the employees with brain injuries or those dealing with other kinds of workplace disabilities, and examining the link between perceived discrimination and poor health outcomes. And before she comes and answers her first question, just want to welcome everyone, send the link, share it with folks. Thank you for joining us on this platform for our Faculty Spotlight. The platform does have a chat box or Q&A box. Invite you to plug questions there. I will be monitoring it throughout the interview, and toward the end, there's reserved time for Dr. Cole to introduce or respond to those questions. So without further ado, I'm going to mute myself and allow Dr. Cole to unmute herself and tell us a little bit about yourself, your academic training, and your field of expertise. Welcome, Dr. Cole.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Thank you so much, Provost Strayhorn, for inviting me to participate on Faculty Spotlight. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Vernita Elliott, my department chairperson, as well as our dean, Dr. Ritter, for recommending me to fill this faculty position. Before I get started with and speak to some of the accomplishments that you cited in my introduction, I want to talk a little bit about my social work background. I actually started in Washington, D.C., which is my hometown, and was actually working in Child Protective Services as a social worker. Actually working with children and families who were living in some pretty stressful conditions. There were at times allegations of abuse and neglect, and my role was really to confirm whether or not that was the case and work with the families to develop a plan so that they could get themselves back on track and living well. The second social work position was with the District of Columbia Public Schools, where I actually was involved with special education evaluations of 4 children, and actually conducting individual and group therapy sessions with those children in the school system who were having emotional difficulties and challenges in terms of that impacted their academic performance, and conducted individual and group therapy with them in accordance with their individualized education plan, or what is known as an IEP. And so I think that those two experiences as a social worker really paved the way for what was to come for me in the future. I think that the underlying theme throughout those two experiences was stress, and how individuals were impacted by stress, living under stressful conditions. And those experiences always stayed with me. So as I moved forward in my research and teaching, those experiences stayed with me and really impacted my decisions around research topics and teaching of courses.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. And you know, your bio speaks so much about your experience and your preparation. So can you tell us a little bit about your experience as a legislative aide or legislative assistant and policy fellow? That was really exciting to read in your bio. Tell us a little bit about the experience and maybe what you bring from that experience into your teaching and research now.
Yeah, well, it was an exciting experience. I got a chance to work with the late Senator Ted Kennedy. Actually, it was a year before he passed away of brain cancer. So that was a tremendous opportunity. Our focus during that fellowship year, again, which was awarded by it was the Jack Geiger Congressional Health Policy Fellowship. And the focus there was on the elimination of health disparities. We were focusing on a bill, actually bill number 1576. And Senator Kennedy at the time was really working hard to gain support for that bill, along with Republican colleagues, of course, with everyone, to see if we could really address and get to the root causes of health disparities, especially among persons of color. And unfortunately, we weren't able to get that bill passed. But I learned a tremendous amount about the legislative process, what goes into actually writing up a bill, the language, and also working with people who may have different political orientations, and how do you work together with those individuals to get things done if you can. And so that experience really brought a wealth of knowledge for me in terms of moving on to teach courses such as legislative services, health policy, because I was really able to tap into the experience that I had on Capitol Hill. So it was wonderful, and I would certainly encourage students who are interested in learning more about the legislative process to seek out a fellowship such as that.
That's great. Dr. Cole, we're having some technical difficulties with the sound. So are you able to adjust your mic just for a quick moment? I want to make sure everyone can hear the wonderful information you're sharing.
Okay. Let's see. Can Can you hear me? A little bit better?
It's still broken on my end, but I also have someone from Academic Affairs working with us to make sure that we can see what we can do. So we'll continue. Hopefully it will clear up. And if there's like a microphone or something, we may have to try to readjust the technology. But let's keep going and maximize our time. So that was, you shared a little bit about your assistance and fellowship experience and how that's really impacted your work, and appreciate for all that will both listen to this episode and who will watch the recording, especially to our students. You know, you definitely want to connect with Dr. Cole if you're thinking about maybe a fellowship or some sort of internship experience that will really give you that legislative practice experience that will bring the curriculum to life. So we want to talk about your publications, and you've published quite a bit about people who are living and working with disabilities. So tell us a little bit about that, your research, your scholarship, and what got you into that particular set of research questions.
I think that it started pretty much from my dissertation. I have had a long-standing interest in chronic illness and how individuals cope with chronic illness. How do they live with that? And my dissertation actually focused on sickle cell disease specifically, and women of color, African American women who were affected by sickle cell, specifically looking at how they perform their social roles in society as workers, as wives, as mothers, and how the disease impacted their ability to perform their roles. And so that then led to me focusing my research in that area, looking at chronic illnesses, again, how people are live with it, impacted by it. And I, over the past several years, was specifically interested in the intersection of the workplace and living with a chronic illness and disability, and then actually returning to the workplace. So in more recent years, I kind of shifted my focus from sickle cell disease to traumatic brain injury. And that's where I am now in terms of really looking at what their experiences, individuals' experiences have been, and how policies in the workplace either support or, and sometimes may not support, individuals who are returning to the workplace after a brain injury. And then the specific book chapter that you mentioned earlier focused on the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that was a very interesting study because it looked at cases that had been brought before the court by persons affected by brain injury, and looking at whether or not the law actually provided them with the protection that they sought. And in some cases, we saw that the law provided excellent protection. But in some cases, it did not. So it was an interesting study, and I think it really spoke to the need to revisit the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I'm hoping that with our new administration coming on board, that will happen.
Hi, Dr. Cole. This is Ms. Freeman.
Yes. Hi, Ms. Freeman.
Hi. Awesome information. And because we're having a few technical difficulties, if we can get you to just leave the meeting and come right back in, because you're really helping a lot of people. We're getting information in the chat, and we're not sure what's going on right now. So if you can leave the meeting and jump back in, and we're going to allow our provost to kind of fill in while you do that real quickly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Freeman, and thank you, Dr. Cole. We will, so in TV world, we call this a little commercial break. So we'll let you leave out and then come right back in.
Okay. Let me see.
And while you do that, to everyone who's joined us, thank you for joining us for this episode of our Faculty Spotlight series here at Virginia Union University. We're delighted each and every week to bring you a featured episode highlighting one of our faculty members here at one of the nation's best and brightest and exciting historically Black colleges located in Richmond, Virginia. That is the capital city of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we've been speaking this morning with Dr. Portia Cole, who is Associate Professor in the Department of Social Work and Sociology. She's been talking with us about her legislative assistant experience and doctoral fellowships. She's just now started to talk about her research. A lot of her research looks at both publications about people who are living with sickle cell and other types of medical conditions, but she has a primary focus in her research looking at the impact of ADA, the American Disabilities Act, on employees and those who are living with physical and workplace disabilities. In the particular paper we're going to talk with her about in the second segment or second part of this interview is one of her publications that was published in the Journal of Social Work and Public Health, looking at work-family conflict stress among African-American women. And I can't wait to hear her insights about that publication and looking at specific relationships between job demands and workplace culture, and just an exciting conversation. So thank you again for joining us. The numbers are growing. You can certainly share the link with your colleagues and in your network. The live recording of this will be made available after today's interview. Hopefully you like our new platform, which allows us to use Zoom webinar technology that makes it a lot easier, it seems, for people to just join right into the episode. And so we're excited about this new platform and bringing this information to you. Certainly for those of you who have used Zoom before, we see a couple of comments in the chat. There's also a Q&A feature. We certainly invite you to put a comment in the chat or to share a Q&A question. So make yourself familiar with the platform. Don't be afraid to search around. When Dr. Cole gets back, we want to use that to speak with her about the particular publication piece. And so we want you to use the Q&A chat. And we have one poll that we may also issue before we close out today. Thank you for staying tuned with us. We have Dr. Cole back with us, and hopefully the sound and all of that is much better. And so we will begin and pick up with the question about her publication. Dr. Cole, can you hear me?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, and it sounds
Okay.
wonderful.
Oh, great.
All right. Well, thank you so much for everyone staying tuned. I can tell you all the numbers are stable. People are keeping tuned in. So you were talking about the book chapter. I want to offer you a comment or two to finish that up. And then I want to ask you about a particular publication that I read of yours in preparation for this. This is your piece in the Journal of Social Work and Public Health. It's about factors associated with work-family conflict stress. Yes. Among African-American women. I think in a day and era of Black Lives Matter and Black girl magic and all that's going on in the world. And hello, we've got our first Vice President-elect, yes. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, who's also an HBCU graduate. I thought this is a great topic for us to tackle. So if you want to offer any more comments about the book chapter, and then we'll pivot.
Well, you know, as I said before, I hope that the Americans with Disabilities Act that we can revisit it in this new administration. It was passed in 1990, so that was quite some time ago. And there's just been a lot of changes in the workplace, and just in some cases, attitudes towards individuals who are returning to the workplace, wanting to move ahead, you know, after having the experience of a brain injury, and they want to move forward. And so the Americans with Disabilities Act can certainly assist them in that way. But again, I do think that there are some tweaks that need to take place, and I hope that can happen as we move forward with the new president. In terms of the article you mentioned about the women and work family conflict stress, you know, that was a very, very interesting study, because it utilized data from the National Women of Color Work Life Survey. This was a survey of over 7,000 women of color, African American, Asian, Latina women who were working in corporate settings. My colleague and I at the time decided that we would focus specifically on African American women, which gave us a sample of about 607. And this was the first time that this data had ever been analyzed. I was able to access this data from the Center for Women Policy Studies in DC. They had never had the data analyzed, and so I was able to capitalize on that and take advantage of that opportunity. I think what was most interesting with that study was the perception of racial bias in the workplace. And specifically, we looked at women's experiences of, for example, hearing racial jokes in the workplace. Some women felt that they had to really play down their race in order to survive and thrive, if they could, in those corporate settings. It was interesting that women who were in supervisory management positions and women who were married, of course, tended to experience higher levels of work-family conflict stress. And what I mean by that is, again, the ability to meet the expectations and the demands of the workplace, as well as expectations and demands at home. So women who were married, who were in supervisory management positions, experienced higher levels of that type of stress. And those women who were more so in kind of the lower level positions, maybe administrative or clerical positions, did not seem to experience that as much. And so that paper really outlined what we could do in terms of the social work profession to move that agenda forward in terms of looking at women of color and their experiences in the workplace. And I really laid out, and as if you read, I really laid out quite a bit in terms of implications for policy that social workers could get engaged in, as well as research and how we can move forward with this particular data set. So that it was just an amazing experience to see what the women were experiencing around race, and how explicit it was for them and how real it was for them.
The other part that I want our listening audience to know, and certainly if you have not, run now, not now, let's finish the interview, but run to the Journal of Social Work and Public Health and type in Dr. Portia Cole and read this paper, because it's a fascinating study of analysis, really, of 607 African-American women in 16 different Fortune 1000 companies. So all of the findings that she's talking about, these are women who are working in some of the best in the, most profitable, productive businesses. And listen to her finding. One, they experience racial bias in the workplace, and she's uncovering these more subtle forms of workplace bias, racial bias, and how it impacts their work and family lives. So, and you're right, there are a ton of good policy and practice implications. I guess, we hope that as this new platform allows us to live stream on Facebook and YouTube and share the recording broadly, that this recording may find its way into one of those Fortune 500 or 1000 companies. So Dr. Cole, now that you've got the attention of some CEOs, what advice do you have for them based on your study?
Well, I think that certainly listening to women, giving them an outlet and a platform to be able to express their concerns, creating an environment that is safe for them to be able to do that. And that's not easy. And it certainly is going to be a process. It's going to take time to do that. I think it's going to take some retraining and retooling of management practices and even their education. Individuals who are in those management roles have to be re-educated about what it may be like for someone who is different from you. Because we found in that study that the majority of the CEOs in those corporations were white males. And so again, their experiences certainly were different from those women of color in those corporations, especially those who had risen to the management, upper management roles. I could imagine from again reading some of the responses from the women in the surveys that it was even more difficult. The higher up you go up to that glass ceiling, the harder it gets in terms of really putting your finger on the racial bias, because as we talked about in that paper, there were some really subtle forms of racial bias that at some points didn't even show up in statistically significant ways in the results. I mean, that's how subtle those biases were. And so, yeah, I think that management, they have to be re-educated and be open, because they have to, certainly they see, and hopefully they see the value of having women of color in those roles. But if we're going to have women of color in those roles, we have to create an environment and an opportunity for them to thrive and to grow and to feel safe while they are accomplishing the goals and the mission of that organization.
That's exactly right. I mean, what you're talking about there is what the real equity work, right? That we have to create workplace environments where not only can people of color and women of color, based on your study, have a seat at the table or achieve that senior most position, but that they can actually thrive and flourish and be respected and succeed there. So, we're at the end of our time, but I do want to give you an opportunity to speak to the students who will likely are watching now or will watch the recording, and then offer your closing remarks. What advice do you have for those who might be considering a major or minor or graduate degree in social work or related field?
Right. Well, I think that students or potential students for social work really need to be prepared to engage in some self-analysis and self-awareness. Oftentimes in working in the field, they will encounter individuals who may have a different cultural orientation, may have different value system. And it's important for students considering social work to know yourself, to learn yourself. And that's a process in itself. But making sure that as they encounter individuals who are different, to be able to be open, and not to engage in judgment in any way, because the purpose of actually working in the field is really to help, to engage in the helping process and to support individuals in terms of their right to self-determination. And so again, all of that is going to play a role if you choose to go into social work. Again, wanting to help is great, but knowing yourself is even more important.
Thank you so much. And that was really great advice, Dr. Cole. And to all of the folks in our listening audience, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Faculty Spotlight series, each week highlighting the talents and the research contributions and teaching of our faculty here at Virginia Union University. Stay tuned for our next episode. Until next time, be sure to wear your mask, wash your hands, stay 6 feet apart, but tune in for our next episode. Enjoy your weekend. Take care.